This story begins 100 years ago when a spatial rift opened on Earth, releasing fierce beasts that threatened humanity, creating a world where only those who awakened with hidden talents could survive. This is the story told by Ye Tian, an orphan whose parents were victims of this world. He survived only with his sister, being the only support for one another. However, Tian has a problem. His talent is low, which means his life is ruined. But he won't accept this and will fight at all costs to survive. This brings us to a city being destroyed by a colossal beast, with everyone escaping except Tian, who remains still, watching terrified people pass by, filled with fear, terror, and despair. His gaze turns to his arm, which emits terrifying rays with a series of glowing veins running through his body. He screams in desperation, releasing a massive wave of power. The glow fades, leaving Tian in an empty world where a small pink orb slowly descends to his face just as he wakes up in a room, confused, thinking his awakening was just a dream. He remembers how that world was invaded by dimensional beasts through a rift, which amplified the talents of humans, creating a small percentage of humanity that led the era of talents. His thoughts are interrupted by a knock on his door, and on the other side is his little sister, asking if his awakening is over. Tian hears this and takes out a magic stone to measure his new talent, which is categorized as weak, immediately realizing that his life is ruined since he doesn't have enough ability to be a warrior who can protect his sister. Just then, she enters, excited, asking how it went. He lies, pretending he has good talent, making her happy and encouraging her, promising to become a superpowered martial warrior. He looks at her, changing his expression immediately when he sees his sister, Yeyu's status window appear in front of him. She eagerly grabs his hand, ready to take him to eat. In that moment, Tian establishes his talent as compatible, asking if he wants to copy his sister's cultivation talent. Realizing that his desperate situation just changed, they go to eat, where Tian thinks about his new ability. Seeing that he cannot test it with his sister, he decides not to copy her talent. However, he notices that Yeyu's talent is much better than his, as it is Frost, a rare ability that he assumes will help him dominate his enemies. While eating, he promises his parents in heaven that they can now rest easy. Later, in the city, Tian walks, hooded, ready to test his power by activating a kind of sonar that allows him to detect someone's talent within a 3-meter radius. He is disappointed to find himself surrounded by people with low talents, none of whom are useful to him since he's looking for something of at least mid-level. He believes that the best place to find his talent is the academy, and now he can enter since he's an awakened. However, he fears that when he copies someone else's talent, his own will change. So, smiling, he seems to have a plan and heads to the Lenai base of Academy number 5, where he passes through a crowd of strong, equipped individuals, hoping to find a mid-level talent. He believes that with his ability to copy, he will become the strongest there. This marks the beginning of his first trial at the academy, where he learns that the first step to becoming a martial warrior is to be a martial apprentice, guided by a military-type teacher who assigns his students the task of creating a vortex in front of them. Among them is Tian, who remains focused while his classmates begin to faint or quit, failing the exercise except for him, who continues concentrating, determined to be the best. However, when he tries to create the vortex, he crashes into a wall and realizes that he can't create anything. He struggles to maintain focus until the teacher ends the class, recognizing them as the worst group he has ever trained, hoping they will look to a student named Chung Don as an example. Later, when asked by his classmate Sang who this person is, he explains that he is an ordinary individual who became a martial artist in a few months, so prodigious that the director himself took him as a disciple and even gave him an autograph, which he hopes will become valuable when Don gets famous enough to cover some of his expenses. This leaves Tian feeling a bit embarrassed. However, a commotion breaks out in the academy with the arrival of Chung Don, who walks smiling through the crowd of people asking for his autograph, including Sang, who rushes to get one, while Tian watches him with malice, seeing him continue greeting others, and thanking him for his support, and following him with his gaze. He is very attentive to his status screen, which marks him with a medium-level talent. So he decides to go greet him, just when Don calms everyone down by stating that the professors sent him to motivate them, not give autographs. Tian takes the opportunity to suggest that he shake hands with all of his admirers, which Don quickly accepts. The protagonist forms a line, waiting patiently for his turn, while Don continues to shake hands with several people. Finally, when his turn arrives, with a malicious look, he sees his opportunity, takes Don's hand, and unleashes more waves of energy under the gaze of everyone, confident that he will have him later. On a rainy night, Tian is in a cave on a mountain, facing the option of merging the ability he copied, doubting what will happen next. Remembering the strange dream he had upon waking up, he nervously bites his nails. Tired of thinking, he decides to leave everything to chance and starts the fusion, adopting a meditation position. Quickly, the power transforms into a brutal pressure on his chest, making him scream in pain. Crawling and not understanding why the fusion ends this way, he scratches the ground, trying to endure as his body fills with veins. A manic smile spreads across his face as the strong thunder continues to fall outside until he finally calms down. With the copied talent, he believes it's worth the pain. He observes how his system screen shows that his talent copying ability has cooled down and can be used again in 30 days, which he finds amazing, considering that it's the perfect moment to test the ability the professor showed him. He successfully creates a vortex in front of him, which is much easier than he expected. At this point, he thinks that with this ability, he will not only become a martial warrior, but an elite one, walking out of the cave with confidence. A month passes, and we see a brightly lit night in the city. Under the moonlight, a monstrous, giant wolf flies across the sky. On the street, a little girl asks her father to buy her something to eat, and the father tries to oblige. Just in the opposite direction, Tian walks past them, well aware that he must continue improving, since the person who stole his power even has private classes with the director. Meanwhile, the father promises his daughter to cook her favorite dish. In seconds, blood flies, a lamp falls, and the man's head disappears into a pool of red. This awakens Tian's senses, who turns to see a giant wolf devouring the father's head in front of his terrified daughter, while the creature eyes the girl as its next target. Tian, still in shock, watches as others around notice the creature's presence and flee in terror, while the girl continues to watch her father being devoured. Suddenly, the wolf lunges at the girl, which is when the protagonist finally reacts, saving her and trying to escape with her. But the beast is faster. From the buildings, a figure in armor and with a sword appears, cutting off the wolf's path. The beast retreats, staying still while growling. This is a knight that Tian seems to recognize, who apologizes for being late and introduces himself as Gale Wolf. He charges toward the beast, while Tian covers the girl's eyes so she doesn't see the battle. In the fight, the warrior sends the wolf flying, but it continues to return, unwilling to yield. Gale feels he cannot defeat it alone, when suddenly another voice joins the battle. 3 other figures appear from the buildings and move toward the wolf. Upon seeing them, the creature quickly escapes at full speed. The warrior admits that it was fast, but his team is here. They surround the creature, ready to land the final blow. As the wolf is pierced all over its body, only one final strike remains. But then, the wolf begins to glow red, causing its captain to order a retreat. The wolf is about to explode, sending all the attackers flying, leaving the wolf close to escaping. The protagonist shouts in alarm, but the warrior assures him not to worry, as the wolf won't be going anywhere, trusting his archer to take the perfect shot. The archer shoots directly at the wolf's head, causing it to fall to the ground. Gale arrives, boasting, and the others begin congratulating each other. However, the protagonist's attention is not on them, but on the monster. With his ability, he can see the creature's talent, but he also sees that it is still alive and moving. It gets back up to attack again, and all the warriors are alerted by their captain to retreat and reorganize. Gale tells the protagonist to take the girl to a safe place. Tian sees this as an opportunity and rushes toward the monster to touch its back and copy its talent, starting to strike it again. And again, he seems like a madman, his system telling him that he has copied the talent, his fists soaked in blood to the point that Gale has to stop him, seeing him completely out of control, making him react and realize that he succeeded in copying the talent. With this, Gale sends his companions to handle the bodies and assigns his archer the small task. He then leaves, not without first congratulating the protagonist, telling him that he hopes to see him again soon as a martial warrior with strength. This leaves the protagonist very excited. However, before going home, he washes himself to remove the traces of the monster and avoid worrying his little sister. He stares at his reflection in the mirror. He then arrives home, where he finds Wei asleep on the sofa, waiting for him to have dinner together. Now more relaxed, he admits that it was the first time he saw a monster, and it was much scarier than he had imagined. Still, while covering his sister with a blanket, he can only think of becoming a warrior to protect her. When he gets to his room, he gets comfortable and tries to clear a doubt. Can he merge with monster talents? The answer is yes, but he assumes it will be 100 times more painful than with human talent. Thinking he has no other option to become stronger, he looks at the monster's blood and speed talents at the beginner level and bites a cloth to prepare himself, starting the copy of the speed talent. Intense pain shoots through his body as he writhes, throwing himself to the ground, feeling as if each of his bones is breaking. He endures as best as he can until, at that moment, his leg twists unnaturally, causing him to scream in pain. He struggles to stand up but collapses again, thinking both his legs are broken, believing the copy failed. He looks at his shattered feet, convincing himself that this time, he's finished, lamenting failing his sister, falling asleep from the pain. When he wakes up in the morning, he gets up startled, wondering what happened. Upon looking at his legs, he finds that they're as good as new, and now he feels much lighter. He starts kicking, and just as he's enjoying it, the system interrupts to inform him that the copy was successful. At the academy, in the tree area, he tests his new abilities, jumping through the air, enjoying it, feeling like a child as he falls to the ground. He quickly changes to a more serious expression and runs at full speed to stop a leaf falling from a tree, admiring his new wolf-like powers. Then, he jumps onto a rock to do martial training, forming an orb of air in front of him, feeling that his speed is now at the level of a warrior but his energy is still lacking. He thinks about ways to solve this when Sang, who has been searching for him in the academy, appears. Immediately, Sang notices how much stronger his friend has become and asks if he wants something, offering monster blood, claiming that it will make him the strongest. Tian is surprised by this effect and regrets wasting so much blood the other day when he overdid it with the wolf. Luckily, his friend seems to have a way to get more through a new wild zone outside the city, established by the academy's high-ranking officials. It's an area used for exams for the main schools, and the reward for completing it is monster blood. Tian asks about the difficulty, and Sang says it's low since the creatures have been eliminated, leaving only their young. This convinces the protagonist to go, so Sang asks him to join his squad to conquer the area, but Tian thinks it over and prefers to go solo, which hurts Sang's feelings, as he considers it bad friendship. Despite this, they remain friends, walking together, while Tian thinks it'll be problematic to team up because his ability might be exposed. So, he decides to go alone to get the blood and advance as a martial warrior. A month later, he arrives at the academy's director, who is annoyed to see Tian wanting to participate in the exam even though he wasn't summoned. The boy insists that as a martial apprentice, he is qualified, and as a result, the director throws a paper at his face. Tian picks it up and reads that it's a life responsibility waiver, basically telling him to accept that he could die or leave and stop wasting time. This causes the boy to feel worried, but later, he walks confidently through the halls, remembering how he signed the waiver. This puts a smile on the director's face, who, seeing it as a challenge, promises that Tian will regret taking the exam. Meanwhile, Yu, who has just woken up, calls her brother to get up and eat, unaware that the food is already prepared and too much. She wonders why her brother did this until she finds a note in the kitchen saying that due to a school event, he won't be back for 3 days. This leaves her worried, hoping he's not in danger. On the other hand, in the desolate, ruined, gloomy, and dark wild area, a group walks along strange paths, among them Tian, who notices there are too many people, something his friend Sang thinks is logical since students from all 5 academies have arrived. Meanwhile, in the distance, a person laughs upon seeing someone from the 5th academy, calling them trash from a worthless academy. This is a swordsman, accompanied by his giant butler, who tells his master that in this exam, they can hunt both monsters and humans. Seeing that more is better, the swordsman, with a calculating expression, plans to have the weak ones thank him for doing it. Meanwhile, Tian notices the person, and his friend gives him information about this, being the youngest member of the family, which explains why he is so arrogant. At that moment, another figure appears, alerting everyone from the 1st academy. This is a man with a sword and a great aura, ready to fight, asking Mo Chao Bei to give him a chance to tear him apart. The heir seems to know him, as he offers him another defeat, exchanging glances. Tian wonders who he is, and his Google-like friend responds that he is Li Yun, a sword genius from the 2nd academy, whom Mo has already defeated before. The director is annoyed at how inquisitive the protagonist is, calling him illiterate. The protagonist responds by excessively cheering for Li Yun, who is surprised that the guy isn't afraid of Mo, although somewhat embarrassed by how intense he is. However, their attempts to fight are interrupted by the loudspeaker, announcing that fights are prohibited outside of the event. Li Yun steps back, promising to face his rival later, who only looks at him with disdain. Then, this same person approaches the protagonist, seeing him as brave for cheering him on and asking for his name. He gives it to him while his radar activates, revealing his talent with the knife, which catches the protagonist's attention. He extends his hand, encouraging him to beat Mo, which makes Li Yun happy. He then asks Tian to also work hard and survive. Once humans touch, the copy starts, and seconds later, the event begins with the first academy running at full speed and Mo jumping, determined. Sang returns to his academy, just like Li Yun, who wishes the protagonist good luck before leaving. Alone, Tian moves quickly to the deepest part of the forest to begin his skill fusion, which quickly fills every part of his body with intense pain. However, this time he only smiles, determined to get stronger. With a great flash, he exits the forest, feeling like new, ready to test his sword skills, slicing through several trunks in a single cut. This makes him feel ready to leave when, at last, the loudspeaker announces the entrance of the 5th Academy, with everyone prepared to go. And so, they descend into the desolate city, and Tian senses the presence of a creature in the area. There's a huge serpent about to attack him. Preparing himself, he leaps at the monster, and with a single sword movement, he strikes its head. The creature falls to the ground, and Tian collects a small orb that seems to be his point accumulation. Surprised by how weak the monsters in the area are, he stores the orb, noticing that the rules indicate the more he eliminates, the higher his rank will be, needing many more to reach the first place. Complaining about the long way ahead, he starts by hunting more beasts, jumping to move between buildings. A desperate cry for help halts him. From above, he sees a completely terrified person surrounded by wild wolves, watching as one rushes toward him. Tian decides to use arrows to take down the wolf, landing in the middle of the battlefield and surprising his friend, asking if he can take the points. However, Sang tells him to flee, as he's no match for the wolves. To this, Tian responds by launching himself at full speed into the middle of the wolves, who try to attack him. Tian calmly draws his sword and, with a simple cut, slashes all 3 wolves to pieces, leaving his friend amazed as he watches the massacre from afar. Once everything is calm, Tian collects the wolf fangs, asking his friend for permission. Clearly knowing that without him he wouldn't have made it, and seeing him so injured, the protagonist asks if he will continue, but Sang has already given up, both for himself and his teammates who are scattered and unconscious across the field, hoping at least to get them out alive. Seeing that that's all he can do, he decides to leave. Before that, his friend warns him about a pseudo-beast he should be cautious of, which is considered the most dangerous creature in the area. It seems to be a 10-meter serpent that the 1st Academy was hunting, and according to Sang, it should be worth about 500 points. This puts a smile on Tian's face, who insists on knowing its location. Sang gives him the direction, and the protagonist dashes off, confident that with those 500 points, he'll reach first place. As he leaves, his friend watches with concern. Tian runs through the buildings, but he stops when he sees something. It's essentially a massacre of students, identifiable by their uniforms as members of the 1st Academy. In the distance, a giant blaze spreads from a location where he recognizes the pseudo-beast's lair. However, he launches at full speed to reach a building, where he observes the massive fire and the ruins of the battle. Surprised, he sees the pseudo-beast, a colossal muscular demon with a serpent's tail, still fighting more students from the 1st Academy, led, or rather ordered, by Mo continues sending his teammates to kill the beast and take the points. They all try to strike, but they fail. Mo's servant tells him the beast is ready for the final blow, and Mo rushes in to attack, jumping at full speed with a confident smile, hitting the creature's head, thinking he's won, until the beast knocks him far away, crashing into a building. Although in pain, Mo smiles, believing he's secured the points. The creature writhes in pain, and Tian, irritated, watches the scene, realizing he lost the kill by arriving late. With everything calm again, Mo returns confidently, being congratulated by his servant and teammates while smiling, sure he is first place. However, the creature opens its eyes, rising aggressively, changing color, and unleashing its power. With a tail swing, it sends several students flying. Mo, worried, watches as the creature releases a blood explosion, transforming into a full monster. This only convinces him to send his teammates to search for it, assuming it's worth more than 1,000 points. Surprised, everyone rushes to chase the points, led by Mo, who thinks that with all the damage dealt to the creature, they cannot let anyone else take the kill. At that moment, someone is watching his target, deciding to get in position to use his maximum speed talent, soaring through the air and traveling between the buildings until he finally lands on one. From there, he continues more slowly, noticing that no one has arrived yet, following the monster's trail, which leads him to an old warehouse, where he knows he will find the 1,000 points. Inside, he tracks the serpent's essence, which leads him directly to meet the enormous creature in the shadows. It is drinking small drops of a silver substance, which Tian knows well isn't just water. Unsheathing his sword, he downplays the situation and goes for his points, launching into an all-out attack, thinking he has everything under control. However, the creature turns to face him with a smile, responding to the attack and sending him flying. Tian realizes the monster is very fast, flying through the air, and decides to use his bow and arrows, making a shot that lands perfectly in its eyes. He then grabs his weapon while still airborne, taking the opportunity to strike back, landing on the monster's arm, causing significant damage and shouting to give it his all before moving towards its head to finish it off. The monster ends up in a large puddle of pink liquid, falling to the ground along with the protagonist, who smiles, admitting that he sweated to defeat it, confessing he wouldn't have managed it if not for the fatigue caused by the First Academy. Now, his attention shifts to the strange liquid the monster had been drinking, which he decides to store in a jar for later investigation. He also has another problem to deal with, mounting the monster's corpse to remove one of its eyeballs as proof of his victory. He also extracts valuable blood from its heart. Once he has what he needs, he looks at the strange liquid but, unsure of what it is, decides to ensure it is not found, eliminating the source where it had been dripping. With his objectives completed, he plans to return later. Arriving at the location of the First Academy, he finds the monster's lifeless body, now devoid of blood, eyes, and heart, just an inert corpse left behind. The servant, confused, asks what should be done, and the furious leader can only curse the thief who took his prey. The protagonist, meanwhile, hides in the shadows, waiting for the First Academy to exit the warehouse. They are furious, quietly searching for the thief, while Mo is tasked with investigating all the subjects they find. Tian, however, chooses to remain stealthy, quickly escaping the area, moving through the rubble, knowing that sooner or later, they'll find him, especially after he hands over the proof once the event is over. That's why he decides to use the remaining 3 days to cultivate his strength. He reaches a place ruined enough to serve as a hideout and sits to think about using the monster's blood. After drinking a few drops, he realizes it's the worst thing he's ever tasted, but that doesn't stop him. Motivated by the desire to become the strongest and protect his sister, he drinks it in one go. This causes his sister to sneeze, thinking maybe her brother is thinking of her while she's at school. Returning to the protagonist after drinking the blood, he begins emitting a green aura that boosts his growth power. He wonders if this is why people like Qindong and others are so strong and decides to use it to develop his skills in the remaining 2 days, considering all the blood he has to drink. The event concludes, and everyone returns to present their points. Among them, Li Yun confidently places his points on the table, totaling 195, which astonishes everyone. However, Mo quickly arrives with his entourage to mock him and his teammates, deeming them unworthy of challenging him. Mo shows his points, which total 427, again shocking everyone, except Yun, who believes it's impossible to reach such a number unless points were stolen from others. Mo proudly admits to stealing them using his ability against the weak, which further infuriates his rival. The director congratulates him for first place, but Mo is still waiting for the one who stole his 2,000 points. However, the person counting the points hasn't seen anyone else leave, assuming that if they haven't left, it's likely they didn't survive. This seems to please the director, unaware that Tian is approaching from the desolate wasteland, showing his proof on the table. The person counting is astonished upon seeing the monster's eyes, which gives Tian a score of 100 points, winning the event and taking home the prizes, 3 monster blood vials and 100,000 yen. Li Jun is amazed, and Mo is furious upon recognizing Tian as the thief, demanding that his assistant gather all information about him. Mo then greets his friend for bringing glory to the 5th Academy, though he notices that it doesn't make his director happy. The reason is that when you mess with a family like Mo's, it's highly likely that the protagonist will appear out of nowhere, dead. This worries his friend, and that's how the event ends, with the award ceremony where everyone smiles on the podium, encouraged by their fellow teammates. At that moment, Mo, upset about the alleged theft, confronts Tian. Tian responds by basically saying that he too was a thief, which, according to Li Yun, is exactly the same excuse Mo used, hiding behind his ability. This infuriates Mo, who seems to go on the offensive, determined to prove who is the strongest. Tian accepts the challenge gladly, understanding that, in his current situation, there is no way to escape. His only option is to become strong enough that no one dares to look down on him. That afternoon, Tian returns home, greeted by his excited younger sister, who is worried about his condition. She checks him thoroughly to confirm he's in one piece and then prepares a surprise for him, his prizes. Yu is amazed and jokes that with all the money he won, Tian can now get married. However, the protagonist has no such plans, and he gives her the money for school and expenses, both of them excited, though he doesn't fully understand what it is. So, he picks up an illustrated book of treasures to discover it with his brother, eagerly joining in her reading. After reading for a while, they find that the strange stone is called Elixir of Earth. Core is an earth beta that has absorbed the primordial key of the sky and earth for 100 years. According to the book, it only works for lower or intermediate level talents, assuming there might be other elixirs for higher levels. Tian reflects on how useful such an object could be, until his sister interrupts, asking him to take it to become stronger. But he seriously tells her that he doesn't need it, as he has another plan to make her stronger, asking her to be the one to drink it, leaving Au amazed. She's confused and looks at the elixir, remembering that she still hasn't awakened her talent. Her brother confidently says that it won't be a waste if she drinks it, while he checks her status window. Yu's cultivation talent is low, so the elixir could increase it, although he doesn't know by how much. Meanwhile, Yu, excited, prefers to try and sell the object to make more money, but Tian knows no one will trust that sale because the elixir must have come from a spiritual earth energy stone that was already destroyed, so she won't be able to show it to potential buyers. Selling it would only cause problems and suspicion. Yu, sulking from the lost opportunity, insists that they sell it, but Tian, determined, believes it would be a waste not to use it. So, he quietly approaches his sister from behind, taking the elixir and trying to make her drink it. Yu complains and accuses him of trying to send her to San Pedro, the afterlife, though her resistance is in vain as she ends up drinking it, thinking maybe she made a mistake or the book lied. Tired, she decides to go to sleep. Tian stays, meditating, waiting to see if the elixir takes effect. After an hour, something seems to have changed, feeling a sudden boost in her talent. He looks at his sister, who is still asleep, and her status window shows that her cultivation talent has gone up to an intermediate level, increasing by 2 degrees, and her ice talent has also improved. This makes Tian think about the great future she has as a martial artist, and with this evolution, he feels more confident. He's no longer worried about the monster blood he drank earlier, which he softened with fried foods, and checks how much his power has increased this time, discovering that it's now 8 times greater than before. Realizing the talent he gained from the beast is truly terrifying, he also realizes that if he had more blood, he could keep advancing until becoming a martial artist. However, he only has 2 bottles left, which makes him think about how to get more. Days pass, and we see Tian meditating in the forest of the academy. 10 days later, he's meditating so calmly that even birds land on him. However, his peace is interrupted by Sang, who arrives running, flustered, mentioning his main problem. This terrifies Tian, who thinks his rival has come for revenge. Fortunately, his friend turns out to be overreacting, only informing him that Mo is confined to his room, planning to use the heart blood, the low-ranked beast blood, and the venomous snake blood, reflecting that with this, he can't break through as an apprentice. However, he trusts his speed and sword skills will allow him to fight against a martial artist. Meanwhile, at Mo's family mansion, inside a house, a huge reinforced door begins to crack and eventually shatters into pieces. From the shadows emerges a powerful figure. It's Mo, who is congratulated by his servant for having reached the martial artist level. Now Mo exudes an imposing aura. At that moment, his father, Mohen, enters, surprised that his son has finally fulfilled his promise of becoming a warrior. Mohen, one of the ancient gods in the middle-tier martial artist group, is very pleased with his son's achievements. Mo thanks him, bowing and promising not to dishonor the family name. Mohen, happy, asks his assistants if the honor banquet for his son is ready. Upon confirmation, he heads to the venue, bidding farewell to Mo, who is now free to continue with his plans. Mo takes this opportunity to ask his butler if he has investigated the protagonist. The answer is yes. The boy is basically an orphan with no background, which implies they can do whatever they want with him. This surprises the young man, who was expecting to find something that justified Tian's strength. But with this information, Mo orders his servant to find and eliminate the orphan. However, The butler warns that unlike the wild area, they can't get rid of someone without facing consequences outside of it. Mo responds that they can avoid problems by hiring a dark shadow mercenary. Although the butler agrees it's a feasible plan, he points out it would be too costly for a simple boy. Mo then makes a classist comment saying that poor people always think like poor people, adding that rich families like Lini maintain their power by eliminating any genius among the regular people, exemplifying this by breaking a cup. The butler, understanding that according to Mo's thinking, the Fifth Academy can't have a genius, gives a sadistic speech about the survival of the fittest. Meanwhile, in the small forest of the Fifth Academy, Tian is moving at high speed, breaking a giant rock into pieces. Exhausted from his training, he decides to head home before it starts raining. Walking through the city in the rain, Tian suddenly stops, almost paralyzed, upon seeing something incomprehensible in the distance, an activated status window floating in the air. It belongs to Li Kuan, who has a low cultivation talent and a novice shadow talent. Suddenly, a huge shadow descends rapidly, attempting to surprise Tian. He blocks the attack and confused, he asks who it is. The shadow coldly responds that it is his executioner. Tian watches from a distance as Li Kuan, enveloped in power, makes it clear that he will eliminate him. Tian deduces that it's a mercenary sent by Mo and wonders why, being a martial artist, he would choose to eliminate him in this way. At that moment, the ninja leaps through the air, preparing to attack directly. Tian deflects the attack at the last moment, but his enemy goes invisible again. Tian, alert, tries to prevent the next attack that comes from his back, directly at his neck. Astonished, he has no choice but to unleash his own talent, moving out of the mercenary's reach and positioning himself on top of a building. This surprises Li Kuan, who wonders how an apprentice can move so fast. The protagonist then launches his own attack, charging at the enemy at full speed, leaving him no chance to escape, using his sword and releasing a devastating cut that destroys everything in his path but doesn't reach Li Kuan, who escapes, becoming invisible. This frustrates Tian, who finds that this skill is annoying and complicated for normal people but useless against him. He attacks with speed, causing a mortal wound, and Li Kuan falls to the ground, bleeding, unable to comprehend how someone so weak could see through his technique. Tian, approaching angrily, says he'll explain how he did it if he first tells him who sent him. Li Kuan agrees, but as he exhales his last breath, he launches a surprise attack. However, Tian easily dodges it and counterattacks, piercing the mercenary with his sword. When he asks who sent him, the defeated Li Kuan admits it was Mo. With this, Tian pulls out his sword, letting the dying mercenary fall to the ground, then approaches to copy his power, enveloped in a green aura, proclaiming that his enemy's talent now belongs to him. And so the rain continues, the lightning strikes, and Liam's horrified face remains as his last trace in the improvised grave that Tian begins to cover with rocks, with the strong wind stirring the falling leaves in front of the protagonist, who reflects that humans should not fall like leaves torn by the wind or rain. Picking up the leaves from the ground, squeezing them tightly, they would also go after her, and without hesitation, she jumped out the window, moving between the buildings while praying her sister was safe. She quickly arrived at Ye Tian High School. She jumped out the window, moving between the buildings while praying her sister was safe. She quickly arrived at Ye Tian High School, where she desperately searched for her sister. Thinking that no mercenary would eliminate a regular person in a place like this, but doubting how far Mo could go, she felt a threatening shove from behind. With a quick reaction, she positioned herself behind the attacker, threatening them, only to realize it was her sister carrying an umbrella. Somewhat confused but relieved, she asked why she had left school so late. She explained that she stayed to clean the classroom and then opened her umbrella to leave, scolding him for being soaked and barefoot while they walked in the rain. But they were being watched from a distance by a luxurious limousine. From inside, Mo observed with annoyance as Tian was still alive while the protagonist bought sausages with his sister. Both disliked it as they walked home, deciding what to have for dinner. The black limousine kept following them. Tian noticed it but kept walking calmly until they reached home, where his sister informed him that dinner was ready. However, he remained nervous, observing how the limousine stayed parked in front of their house. The next day, Yeyu was in class, and from a nearby building, Tian watched, seeing how the car had been following his sister persistently for 3 days. Furious at the thought they might harm his sister, he decided to act. However, finally the car drove off and the roles reversed. Now Tian followed it, flying between the buildings. He reached a desolate warehouse and saw a man get out of the car and enter. Determined, Tian dropped to the ground, thinking he would face his rival inside. A man was being brutally beaten by Mo's henchmen. The man begged for more time to repay the money he owed, but Mo, who turned out to be a loan shark, doubled the interest on his debt every day. Despite the man's pleas that he had many people to care for, he was interrupted by the butler, Deo. For the eccentric young man's misfortune, the butler had no information about the shadowy assassin they had hired. Tian, in invisible mode, watched, annoyed by how the wealthy man vented his frustration on the debtor with a brutal kick. Tian felt scammed by the mercenary and his butler. Kneeling, the butler apologized and swore loyalty, while another assistant removed the debtor's lifeless body. Bo then asked what they would do with Tian's sister. Very attentive, Tian listened to the butler, who said they would hire a friend recently released from prison. But now, Mo preferred to handle things personally. Tian's nerves increased at the thought of the crazy boy facing his sister, and suddenly Mo, with a sadistic smile, hit him so hard he fell to the ground. Tian asked why, and the cruel Mo answered that it was punishment for failing. At that moment, Tian jumped from the shadows, invoking his new weapons. Mo, unprepared, didn't see the strike coming. Blood splattered on the protagonist's smiling face. With a bloody hand, and the terrified screams of the guards, Tian observed the decapitated body of his master. The butler tried to understand what was happening, recognizing the shadow skill and assuming it was the mercenary. However, emerging from the shadows was a formidable Tian, with a big smile. This terrified the butler, who had always considered him weak. When asked about Likuan, the protagonist, smiling, moved at full speed and appeared in front of the butler, slashing him with a fatal blow. With this act, Tian cleaned his weapon, threw a handkerchief with a written note on the ground, and stored his weapons. He looked at the few survivors who were dying on the floor and told them they had tormented the wrong man. With a triumphant smile, he left the place and disappeared into the streets of the city. An hour later, several cars arrived at the scene, one of which carried Moan, who clenched his fists in rage until he exploded, screaming at the tragic fate of his son. One of his men handed him the bloody handkerchief with the same symbol of the shadow assassin. Seeing it, Moan interpreted it as an insult, but he was interrupted by the arrival of Mo Chong, the great elder and the only martial warrior of the family. This title was above martial warrior and elite martial warrior, just below the grandmaster. Upon his presence, Moan knelt and informed him that his prodigious heir had been exterminated. The elder examined the scene and asked for an explanation. Moan, from the floor, lamented, explaining that his son had reached the rank of martial warrior and that they had just celebrated his achievement, convinced that his son would lead them to the top. But now everything was lost. The elder understood his pain, as he too had placed his hopes on that young man, believing he would become the second great master of the family, taking them even higher, thus ensuring his position as the family's great hope. Through tears, Moan begged the elder to avenge his son, handing him the handkerchief of the shadow assassin. Mo Chong received it, surprised, reflecting that perhaps a rival family had hired the organization. He then examined the fabric under the moonlight, carefully unfolding it until he discovered a hidden message revealing the name, Iron Fong. The next day, Sang explained to the protagonist that the Iron Fong base was much stronger than their Linai base. He told him that the great elder of the Mo family suspected that families within their base were conspiring to overthrow him, intending for it to be absorbed by Iron Fong. The plan started by eliminating talented heirs like Mo, who completely lost his mind. Tian feigned surprise as he listened to this, while his companion recognized him as a lucky guy, since Mo had been after him. The protagonist, smiling, was happy no one suspected him, having left the handkerchief of the shadow assassins on the ground to distract them. However, he didn't know that Mo Chong would find the symbol of the Iron Fong base, triggering this problem. It could also be a plan by the elder to create conflict between the bases. At 4 in the morning the next day, Tian got up and prepared, stealthily getting ready to leave. However, he failed to avoid being seen as Yeyu, still asleep, found him. She asked him where he was going, and he responded that he was heading to the wilderness to get stronger. Yu, worried, reminded him that he had just returned from there and was planning to go alone again, suggesting that he at least find companions to join him. Tian asked her not to worry and promised he would return safely. But Yu, running towards him, hugged him tightly from behind, pleading for him to take care. Tian accepted, promising that he would be fine. He arrived in the desert where, according to rumors, many high-level monsters lived. Though he knew he couldn't yet face them, his goal was to hunt the lower-ranked ones while sneaking around, determined to become a martial warrior. However, an earthquake interrupted him, caused by a gigantic monster nearby, a heavily armored bull with low-level defense talent, which immediately caught the boy's interest. While Tian observed the monster, he didn't realize it had him in its sights, and suddenly the bull charged at full speed. Tian quickly dropped his gear and prepared for the impact, activating his speed, releasing his souls, and jumping like a whirlwind to gain momentum for a clash with the monster. When the bull activated its defense ability, it proved much more resistant than Tian had expected. Furthermore, the bull's ability became offensive, releasing all its energy and throwing Tian into the air. Tian recognized his opponent's excellent talent and claimed the power as his own. The bull charged again at full speed, and Tian, smiling with determination, freed his weapons, claiming the monster's talent as his own and flying straight for its head, targeting the eyes, the weak spot of all creatures. However, his swords were stopped by the bull's barrier, forcing him to retreat. He noticed the impact had cracked his sword, surprised that a talent considered weak could be so strong. Things got worse when the bull launched a second attack, shattering one of Tian's swords, scattering fragments into the air. A powerful punch from the bull sent Tian crashing into the rocks, leaving him wounded. Tian got up, still shocked by the incredible talent of his enemy, which he desired at all costs. However, his skill was still cooling down, and he was confused because the bull seemed stronger than other higher-level monsters he had already defeated. Deciding to take advantage of the bull's large size to find its weak point and attack it stealthily, he dropped his weapon and activated his green aura, marking his only chance to win by becoming invisible. He began attacking, but every strike rebounded without causing any damage. Despite the effectiveness of his shadow ability, the bull didn't even notice the attacks because it didn't feel them. Exhausted and unable to find a weak spot, Tian observed that the bull's defense talent had no openings. Finally, giving up, he sat down but noticed something from an angle. The monster didn't protect its tail well. With nothing to lose, he decided to attack that area, using his dark assault ability to literally break the beast's rear, causing it to scream in pain before collapsing into a pool of purple blood. From above, Tian admired how he had defeated the monster. Later, he examined the bull's lifeless body, discovering that it was as fragile as any other carcass. He collected 3 bottles of its blood, reflecting that, like everything in life, talents lose their value after death. Nonetheless, he decided to make the most of the bull's skin, lower parts, and any other useful body parts, starting with its horns. After gathering everything in his backpack, he began searching for a quiet place to continue cultivating. In a dark cave, he prepared his meal, a mixture of monster blood and peanuts to improve the taste. Hoping this method would help him become a martial warrior, he started drinking the blood and eating the peanuts while focusing, eventually creating a huge orb of power in front of him. 20 days passed in the filthy, dark cave, and during the flashes of power emanating from his body, Tian began laughing frantically. His hair had grown, and his eyes shone as he unleashed his power with a loud scream, marking the moment when he released all his energy, destroying parts of the cave. The rumble caught the attention of 2 girls watching from a distance. One of them, surprised, commented that it was strange for someone to cultivate their talent in such a barren place. Her companions smiled at this, ensuring the martial pavilion brooch was secure. Inside the cave, Tian felt the flow of power had officially brought him to the martial warrior level. Noticing that 20 days had passed, he prepared to seek the armored bull's talent and copy it. Returning to the desert, he tried to extract the bull's talent from its skeleton, but failed when he discovered the incomplete body made it impossible. This mistake made him regret tearing the bull apart. Meanwhile, high above, the 2 girls continued watching him, convinced that Tian was responsible for defeating several monsters in the area, though they couldn't understand how someone who had just reached the martial warrior level could have done such a thing, considering the skeletons had been eliminated for much longer. The girls kept following him until he reached a river. Without noticing their presence, Tian took off all his clothes to take a dip before returning home. Excited to see him naked, the girls quickly decided to leave to avoid looking like perverts. Later, in the Linai market, Tian walked through the stalls, looking for something interesting, and came across a shop that caught his attention, the martial pavilion. Just then, the 2 girls passed by, and the blonde one recognized him. Tian, upon turning to look at her, was astonished, mistaking one of them for you. He called her little sister, or at least he thought she was, but after seeing her clearly, he was confused. This also confused the girl, who quickly turned to walk away but glanced back at him. He realized that the girl he mistook for Yu was Yelin, a true genius with mid-tier cultivation talent, sword talent, and speed. Her strange comment didn't go unnoticed, and the blonde girl became annoyed because Tian called her little sister, insulting him by calling him a garbage collector. This hurt the protagonist's ego, who thought that perhaps he hadn't bathed properly. The girl, Link, nearly spoke out of turn, but her companion, Koyu, stepped in to give Tian instructions on what to say. This time, Tian apologized to the girl, and Link took the lead, dragging him to the store and revealing that their boss was in charge of the Martial Pavilion. As compensation for the insult, they offered to buy anything he was selling for double the price. Tian, amazed, was taken to the store, where he admired the items, which were exactly what he had expected from the biggest store in the area. As he was served tea and shown the items he had brought to sell, they offered him 200,000 yuan. But as promised, they gave him 400,000 yuan. Tian happily accepted the deal, thrilled by the easy money he made, delivered in cards. He thought to himself that this money would surely make his sister very happy. He also received another offer as part of the compensation. Every item he bought from the Martial Pavilion would be half price. Seeing that the items were extremely expensive, he realized how complicated it was for ordinary people to buy them at such prices. This made him think that it was one of the reasons why the main families remained in power. Still, he decided to buy some books. With much monster blood, paying with a gold card he obtained from the mercenary he sent to heaven with everything paid for and packed, the protagonist begins to suspect that he is receiving too many benefits for just one insult, assuming there is something more behind it all. However, he prefers to take advantage of it and leave as soon as possible. But before he reaches the door, Eu stops him with a gesture. The pavilion supervisor wants to meet him. Intrigued, Tian accepts and asks her to guide him. Eu takes him to a room where Lin is waiting, drinking tea. Recognizing the protagonist as the person she saw in the mountains, she surprises Tian by offering him a handshake. She introduces herself as Lin from the Demon Base, an elite martial artist at the peak stage. As their hands touch, Tian also introduces himself, having unwittingly copied her intermediate cultivation level talent. Later, he sits at the table, confused, because unlike the nobles and powerful people invited to the second level of the pavilion, he is just a plebeian. However, Lin wants him precisely because of those connections. Her cold and serious words, along with her gaze, make the protagonist see a great similarity, but also a great difference between her and his cheerful sister, who serves him tea. Lin then gets to the point, placing a red light on the table and asserting that she will be direct with him, asking him to join her martial arts hall. However, the seriousness of the girl is overshadowed by the hallucination of her little sister saying those words, which makes it very difficult to reject her. Smiling, she asks why he hesitates, surely having many talented individuals in her base to require a martial warrior so inexperienced. Lin stands up and, looking out the window, explains that a large base can become even bigger, not because they lack talented individuals but because they are always looking for talent. This intellectual blow leaves Tian amazed, wondering how such a young girl has such mature thinking, as he expected from a base leader, admitting that his little sister could never reason something like this. Lin tries to hurry the protagonist's decision, telling him that he has a unique opportunity, one that many of the elite would want, and that no one has achieved yet. Tian still hesitates, seeing it as a good opportunity, but if he accepts, he will be restricted by the organization, risking death if they discover his ability. Lin, for her part, sits next to him on the table and asks why he doubts. Tian smiles, admitting that it's really hard for him to reject that face. Under her insistence, he admits that he has no idea why he hesitates, thinking about the rumors about the base Linai and the Iron Fang base in the chaotic battle they unleashed for power, and concludes that none of that helps in his peaceful life, not intending to serve people like them. Lin then asks if that includes her. For Tian, it's difficult to exclude her. She then asks him to observe her and agrees not to receive an immediate answer, exchanging silent looks. Later, in the village, Tian is thinking about what a martial artist is, what talent is, and how once it manifests, martial artists really continue remembering their duties, walking through different parts of the village, thinking that their duty is the safety of the citizens. However, when he sees how the children play football happily until their ball reaches a guard's feet, who explodes the ball, crushing it, the protagonist thinks that it should be enough for them to fear the monsters, but they must also live with the intimidation of martial warriors. This is something Tian reflects on from the top of a building, admitting that he can't do anything yet. Still, he is determined to become stronger to do so. Seeing his status screen, he is asked if he wants to merge with his new ability. He presses yes, making the decision. Thus, Tian returns home, where his sister, surprised, happily runs to hug him, noticing that he is even more muscular. She tells him that he is officially a martial artist, which astonishes his sister, who starts shouting and jumping with excitement, making a scene. Tian thinks she is over-exaggerating, knowing that when she awakens her talent, she will also become a martial artist and look for ways to become even stronger. The celebration ends when his sister decides to help her favorite martial artist not look like a beggar. With scissors in hand, she sits him in a chair to cut his hair. Tian nostalgically remembers how, since their parents passed away, his sister always helped him with his hair, having a flashback when they were little and his sister trembled nervously, thinking she wouldn't be able to cut his hair. At that time, he suggested going to the hospital, but not for his hair, but because little Tian was completely beaten up, thinking it wouldn't be worth spending money on doctors, asking her to only cut his hair and cover his wounds. She drops the scissors, crying, thinking that if her brother had the ability of the immortal jellyfish Turritopsis nutricula, a complicated wordplay the protagonist doesn't remember, it would be a fairy tale she used to tell her sister. This ability was one of regeneration, and he immediately tells her it's false, making the little girl throw a tantrum. To calm her down, he tells her that perhaps when she awakens her talent, she might have that power, smiling and telling her that one day, she would never be hurt again, and he would protect her. In the present, Tian jumps out of the chair, finally remembering that story, teasing his sister for ruining his haircut. But she doesn't mind and keeps jumping around excitedly until she finds the treasure book he brought. He discovers that the jellyfish with the exaggerated name does exist, living in the lake of death. His sister, worried about his habit of talking to himself, just watches him. Tian decides to look for the jellyfish to copy its talent and avoid making his sister worry about him. Although she believes it's just a children's tale, he assures her it's real. His sister, excited, congratulates him, and he insists that she finish cutting her hair later. Tian keeps reading, this time about the forging talent, discovering that it can be cultivated according to its level, dividing it into skin forging for beginners, muscle forging for intermediates, and bone forging for advanced martial warriors. He starts cultivating the skill, advancing easily, then adds more monster blood, triggering an energy boost that triples his cultivation speed. Determined to perfect this technique, he waits for the cooldown period, with 30 days left to search for the Medusa in the Lake of Death. Days pass, and Tian arrives at the Martial Pavilion, where Sia greets him with a big smile until she recognizes him as the garbage collector. She rushes to greet him, sure that he's looking for his master. Tian tells her he's not there for that, just to make some purchases. Looking her straight in the eyes, Sia gets nervous as she notices how handsome he looks after his makeover. She lets him through to the shopping area, where Tian directly asks her where the map of the Lake of Death is. The girl searches for it and hands it to him, thrilling the protagonist, who pays and leaves, determined to find that great talent. She remains thinking that he'll probably go back to collecting garbage, but then remembers that the lake is dangerous, even for elite warriors, and she worries for him. So, Tian arrives at the lake, which he recognizes as eerie, hoping to find a good talent to copy. He also notices it feels like a ghostly place, with a strange atmosphere indicating danger, and he's not wrong. Before he can even finish thinking, a gigantic whirlwind appears, destroying the place. The protagonist prefers to observe, hiding with his shadow skill and retreating as far as possible. He climbs high enough to see the entire lake, where in the center, he spots a giant orb inside, distinguishing two figures, an elderly man flying with an umbrella and Ling, carrying a treasure. Tian recognizes them just before a massive monster emerges from the lake. The elderly man shouts that it's too late, barely escaping the bite of the water dragon. On land, they see they are facing a fierce high-level beast, which begins to rise from the water, astonishing the protagonist with the distance it covers. The elderly man decides to distract the creature so the girl can escape. She doesn't want to leave but has no choice, especially when other monsters appear, surprising both of them. Lin escapes, terrified, with the monsters almost catching her, and the protagonist reluctantly accepts that he will have to help, charging at full speed. The beast also runs at full speed, determined to catch her. The elderly man shouts desperately to alert the lady, who just jumps before being devoured, beginning to glow, activating her secret technique that releases a pink tattoo on her forehead and her weapon. This triggers her transformation, changing her appearance and hair color to pink, disappearing from the creature's sight. It searches in all directions while she, from the air, launches herself, cutting it in two with brutal strikes, passing by so quickly that she nearly knocks over a surprised Tian. who quickly retreats to observe from above, realizing that, as a novice, he would be of real help in that fight. As he watches Ling continue slicing and cutting the monster brutally, he sees her as an elite warrior, swiftly exterminating the creatures and leaving a scene of destruction that makes him admit that not even 10 people of his level could land a scratch on the girl. Meanwhile, the giant dinosaur continues fighting with the elderly man, who is captured by the leg, the monster crushing it and making him scream in pain. In agony, the elderly man tells the lady to escape while she can, being in a terrible position, about to be devoured with no chance of escape. He insists that her secret technique won't last much longer and begs her to take the EMS. She, full of emotion, keeps eliminating more creatures but hears the elderly man begging her not to let the sacrifices of his brothers be in vain. These are his last words before he is swallowed. With tears in her eyes and filled with power, she curses the event. From above, she hears how many have died for that treasure, wondering how interesting it would be. Meanwhile, Lin finally decides to escape with the monsters very close to her. However, she suffers a huge power rebound when her technique ends, the pink rose on her forehead falling to the ground with force, dropping the treasure, which bounces until it reaches the protagonist's feet. Surprised, he picks it up. The girl, confused and with blurry vision, screams at him to leave it. Though she has no strength left, Tian uncomfortably replies that he wouldn't steal it, and then picks her up, suggesting they seek refuge in a cave. As she loses consciousness, Tian interprets her silence as agreement and runs at full speed, far from there. In a safe place, he sets up camp with the still unconscious girl while observing her, noting that she looks identical to his sister, except for a mole next to her eye, which he tried to erase to confirm it was real. Now, being sure she isn't his sister, time passes. Tian starts to worry about the girl who hasn't woken up yet, hoping she will soon. He approaches to check on her when she begins to wake up, and he steps back, feeling embarrassed. She, now conscious, recognizes the protagonist, surprised that he saved her, but he emphasizes that he only found her by coincidence, feeling a bit awkward. This is heightened when she thanks him for covering her with his jacket and returns it. Meanwhile, she thinks the boy is very confident in himself for making it alone to the dead lake, and as she observes him closely, she concludes that he must have this kind of talent for the martial pavilion. Determined to recruit him, she releases a light stone that illuminates the whole area, blinding the protagonist because of its brightness. Smiling, she explains that it's a stone that absorbs light and can be used as a lantern. He shows interest in asking where she got it, and proudly, Ling continues to boast about her things, pulling out a recovery potion. This leaves Tian with doubts about the origin of the objects, speculating that it could be some kind of spatial talent, although her status window shows nothing. Remaining alert, he meditates on it. Later, once she's recovered, she asks the protagonist to sit down so she can explain where she gets her objects. She shows him a huge wooden box with treasure in one hand and a small bag where everything fits, even the chest. This is recognized as a rare spatial type item, making the boy very excited. Ling uses this opportunity to promise to teach him how to use it if he joins the martial pavilion. However, the boy completely ignores this and prefers to sleep, which infuriates her because she doesn't plan to give up. Meanwhile, he reflects that once he copies spatial and recovery talents, a bag and a potion won't be very useful, and his main problem is that the girl stirred up the dead lake, making his search harder. So, he falls asleep, and when he wakes up in the morning, he finds himself alone with no trace of Ling. However, he does find a chest containing a book with intermediate forging techniques, 10 bottles of monster blood, and 10 million in cards. Grateful, he thanks the girl for leaving him everything needed to become an elite martial artist. With this, Tian changes his plans and decides to cultivate his power before going after the Medusa. For months pass while he cultivates in a cave, generating an enormous orb of energy. Eventually, the energy becomes uncontrollable and explodes in the sky, destroying the cave. Excited, Tian realizes he's entering the realm of elite martial artists, preparing to start hunting. Walking through the strong rain, the protagonist arrives at an improvised cemetery with 11 graves, courtesy of Ling. Although the warriors who ventured into the depths likely left no trace, she at least left some graves in their honor, showing her good nature. Tian appreciates the gesture. As he observes the place, he finds the umbrella the old man had used under the water. Taking it and opening it, he is surprised that it still works, as all the raindrops are repelled before touching it. Now, it seems like an impermeable barrier that surrounds him in a giant drop of water, allowing him to fly. He immediately jumps into the water and speeds up, activating his shadow ability to become invisible. However, he stops abruptly when he finds himself in absolute nothingness, with a status window indicating the presence of a giant beast called Tiger Octavus, an intermediate-level monster that passes right in front of him. Terrified of being discovered, he decides to continue deeper into the water, hoping to find the immortal Medusa. Unbeknownst to him, a gigantic tentacle is quickly approaching, and barely avoiding it, he realizes the tentacle belongs to the Medusa, a colossal beast with advanced recovery talent. It moves at incredible speed, releasing its weapon to try to hurt the creature, causing it to scream in pain. However, it regenerates within seconds. Astonished, Tian waits for the next strike, blocking it with his hand while copying the Medusa's regeneration talent as expected. He is thrown far, crashing against a rock. He barely manages to get up, laughing because he obtained what he wanted, the regeneration talent. But there's no time to celebrate, as a giant ink cloud approaches him. He blocks it with the umbrella but loses it in the process, leaving him without protection in the deep water. Realizing he won't last much longer and seeing not one, but a swarm of giant Medusas ahead, he decides to do the most logical thing: run. He manages to reach the surface with the tentacles chasing him, jumping out of the water and using his speed to fly toward the shore. Running as fast as he can, he finally collapses, thinking he escaped. He uses this moment to copy the talent, fusing with it during the process. Though the initial pain knocks him to the ground, he begins to get used to it, absorbing the ability quickly and wanting to test it immediately. He does so with the Medusa venom that was injected into his hand during the fight. Using the regeneration talent, his body heals completely, and Tian moves at full speed, amazed that the talent has no side effects. However, he sees it as a problem that all his talents so far are support type. He concludes he must seek offensive talents to face stronger enemies. He decides to return home, reading a treasure book and considering whether to face a gigantic bear or a phoenix, but not being convinced by either. Meanwhile, his sister cuts his hair, complaining about being left alone for so long. He apologizes but is really focused on reading about a divine-powered ant with strength talent, which could complicate martial artists in groups. This marks his next prey. Determined, he heads to the martial pavilion, where the blonde girl greets him enthusiastically upon recognizing him, as it's been a while since they last saw each other. The protagonist tells her he's there for magical ants and the items on that list. She treats him like a child for wanting to eat things like that, but she confirms that they don't have them. However, she has some information about them, mentioning that the Lenai base is preparing a mid-sized commercial channel where there are many beasts, including magical ants. The place she refers to is the Iron Fang base, located 100 kilometers from Lenai. The protagonist realizes that the Iron Fang base is planning to invade that location, and she confirms it, handing him a card. This card is a ticket to participate in the event, and if he joins, he could obtain the magical ants. The moment to go hunting arrives, planning to eventually confront the Mo family.